Okay. Have you ever like walked into a room and
Yeah.
you just see your kid doing something? You're like, what in the world?
Oh, 100%.
The other day, I walk into the living room
Right?
and my 3-year-old
Uh-huh.
is just shoving handfuls of dirt from a potted plant into his mouth,
Oh, no.
like just covered,
Oh, God.
and it got me thinking, you know, how common is this? And it
Mm.
turns out it's really common.
Yeah.
It's called Pica. And you sent us some research on it, and
Mhm.
we're going to deep dive into it today. Pica in children. So why do kids eat, dirt and stuff that's not food?
Yeah. So it can definitely be a little bit alarming, I think, as a parent to see
Yeah.
your kid eating things that aren't food. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a lot more common than I think a lot of parents realize.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all the articles that you sent, talk about it being most common in toddlers, like
Right.
1 to 3.
Exactly. Yeah.
What is it about that age?
Yeah. So during that time, there's a lot of neurological development happening.
Uh-huh.
So basically, their brains are like rapidly making connections.
Okay.
And part of this involves them like trying to figure out the world around them using their senses, right? And so
Mhm.
for little kids, that means exploring with their mouths.
Right, because everything goes in the mouth
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
at that age.
And they haven't quite figured out like the whole,
Food.
this is food, this is not food
Yeah.
distinction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But peak is more than just kind of like that
Right.
taste testing, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It seems like there's something else.
Yeah, there's often like a sensory element to it.
Okay.
So like for example, kids that have autism or sensory processing disorders,
Right.
they might look for very specific textures
Okay.
that give them some kind of sensory input that they're craving.
That makes sense. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about sensory processing disorder for people who
Yeah.
might not be familiar with what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically what that means is the brain has trouble receiving and responding to information that it gets through the senses.
Okay.
So for some kids, like the feel of mud, for example, like squishing between their fingers, or, like the grittiness of sand,
Mm-hmm.
that might be very calming or stimulating for them.
Okay.
And so it's a sensory input that they might actually crave. And this can even extend to like taste and texture in their mouth.
So it's not really about the taste. It's more
Right.
about how it feels in their mouth.
Exactly. Yeah. Like think about
Okay.
the satisfaction that like you might get from popping bubble wrap, right?
Right.
So for some kids, it's similar with like, the texture of dry dirt might feel very similar.
Interesting.
So they're not actually eating it for nutritional value,
Right.
but more so just to get that sensory need met.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But then, some of the stuff you sent me also mentioned nutritional deficiencies.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
is that real, or is that just like a theory? Or
Yeah. So that's a good question. It's actually both.
okay.
So, there's a lot of documentation out there that iron deficiency can lead to cravings for, non-food items, especially in young children. And it's really interesting because things like clay and dirt, which are commonly craved by kids with pica,
Right.
they actually contain trace amounts of iron.
Oh, wow. So their body's like kind of looking for what it needs.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like a
That's wild.
a primal instinct or something like that.
Yeah. But you can't just let them eat dirt.
No, definitely not.
Not a good solution.
Right. So if you do think that your kid might have a nutritional deficiency,
Oh.
it's super important to consult with your pediatrician.
Okay.
They can do a blood test, which is really simple.
Yeah.
And they might recommend like, some dietary changes or maybe
Okay.
even some supplements.
So we've talked about, the developmental side of things and
Yeah.
the nutritional side of things.
Yeah.
But what about, those times where it seems like it's more
Mm-hmm.
behavioral?
Yeah.
Like when they sneak a bite of dirt when they think you're not looking.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
And that can definitely be a thing. So like just how like adults will reach for comfort food
Right.
when they're feeling stressed, kids can kind of express those same feelings through pica.
Interesting.
And it's not always like a conscious decision for
Right.
them. It's more so like they're seeking comfort or attention
Okay.
through this behavior that they've learned gets a reaction.
So how can you tell the difference between like a kid who's like eating sand because they like how it feels
Yeah.
as opposed to a kid who's doing it for attention?
Yeah. So that's where like careful observation comes in. So
Okay.
you want to, as a parent, be mindful of any patterns that you might notice. So, does the behavior increase, for example, when the child is feeling anxious or ignored?
Okay.
Is there like a specific non-food item that they constantly go towards?
Okay.
So those little clues can actually help you as a parent to understand, where's this behavior coming from?
Yeah. So once you figure out the root of the behavior, what are some ways to address it? Because it's like you walk outside
Yeah.
and there's a million things they could put in their mouths.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It can feel like a minefield sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. So, I think the first thing is just like being really mindful of the environment.
Okay.
So, think about it like you're curating a buffet of items that are available to them.
Gotcha.
So, being really present and supervising playtime, especially when they're outside.
Okay.
And making sure that hazardous things are out of reach.
Take away the temptation, basically.
Exactly, yeah.
But then, kids need to put stuff in their mouth.
Right.
Especially at that age.
Yeah.
So what are some safe things?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's important to provide them with plenty of opportunities for oral stimulation
Okay.
that are okay, So,
Right.
So teething rings.
Uh-huh.
There's also chewable toys that are specifically designed for oral motor exploration.
Okay.
So things like that can really help to meet that need without having the,
The risk
associated with Pica.
Right. I was reading about this yum or yuck game.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of that?
Yes,
Where
definitely.
you show them an apple.
Right.
Apple, yum. Play-Doh, yuck.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a great way to teach them in a way that's fun.
Right, because it's a game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And kids love games.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, what happens if you've tried all this stuff?
Yeah. You're playing the games, you're taking away the bad stuff, you're giving them good stuff to chew on,
Right.
and they're still eating dirt.
Yeah. So if, you've done all of that and you're still seeing the behavior, or if you're concerned at all, it's definitely a good idea to reach out to either your pediatrician
Okay.
or a child psychologist.
Okay.
And they can kind of help to figure out, are there any, underlying medical or developmental issues that might be contributing to the Pica?
Okay.
And they can help you come up with the plan to,
Yeah.
manage it.
Get some expert advice.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going through this right now,
Yeah.
you're not alone.
Definitely not.
It's a phase.
Yeah, usually.
And, if you're proactive, you can
Yeah,
get through it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just remember, it's an opportunity to learn more about what your child's individual needs, and then you can provide them the support that they need to be successful.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, this whole thing with Pica, I mean,
Yeah.
it really highlights how, sometimes kids, they're not getting their sensory needs met.
Right.
So it makes me wonder, are there other ways that we can encourage kids to explore their senses in a healthy way?
Yeah.
And what can we do? Especially in today's world,
Right.
where it's everything's so overstimulating.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And something to think about, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely something to think about.
absolutely.